Good morning, Texans fans. Yeah, I'll be quick. The Lord put that on my heart. So as you see our senior pastor, Russell, he's out of town. Please be in prayer for him. He's currently in India doing some pastoral and some ministry work there. So if you've been following him on Facebook, envious of all the amazing things that he's being exposed to and being able to do over there. But keep him in your prayers during that time and know that he's an extension of you guys while he's there, of us while he's there. We pray for safe travels on his way home. So we're in the middle of this generosity series, and he started it off last week, and I thought it was such a great opener, specifically because he used he paralleled the beginning of Genesis, the beginning of the creation of the world. He paralleled that with that of like a parent, and I just relate to that. If you don't know that, I'm currently a new parent. I'm going to say that till my kid's like 20. I'm a new parent, but I totally related to that because he set up how in all these different days, and we talk about how days just means like a segment of time, and all these different segments of time, God was creating all these different things from water to air and the animals and birds. And after all it was said and done, after God spent all this time like prepping, then he created humanity. So he was spending this time prepping so that we would be able to have a glorious life, which is what we feel like we do as parents. And sometimes I discovered as a new parent, some of the things that we think that we're prepping for our child, and they don't even use it or wear it or whatever, or like it, or they want the box that it came in. But nonetheless, we do that when we're a new parent. We have showers, and we plan, and we research, and we read, and we do all these things to prep, and we nest, that's the term nesting, and we do all these things, and it doesn't stop there. Right? We just did that for when they're coming, but we continue to do that as parents. We continue to try to think of ways that we can provide for our children. And so I really love that parallel in Genesis of how with pregnant parents and what we got from all of that is that God did all of these things because it was God's generosity. God's generosity came before we were born. God's generosity came before humankind, and then therefore God's generosity came before we were even born. His generosity was there. And it even extended farther. His generosity extended farther. Not only did he give us all these things, and then he said, I want you to be the steward over these things because I created them for you. Not only that, but his generosity extended into the gospel whenever he sacrificed and gave his son to us. So the generosity just keeps flowing. It's like when a parent chooses to, if it was to keep that analogy going, it's like when a parent chooses to pay their kids college, right? Nowadays, a lot of our students, it's just like it's expectation. No, boo-boo, no, it's not. Your parents do not have to do that for you. That is a gift. Any amen from any of those parents? Okay, I was waiting for that. Thank you. Got some claps on that one. You don't, that's a gift. Okay, that is not, CPS did not say I had to do that. Okay, so that's like God continuing that relationship and that gift giving. And so Tim actually mentioned this. He kind of gave my sermon in 2 sentences, which is like the story of me and his life, right? Tim just says, boop, and I'm like, let me take 20 minutes to take what should tell 2 sentences. So, but he said it whenever he was introducing, I guess it was the beginning, it was opening, whatever it was, he said it. And it was about because our response, it's supposed to be that because our God is generous, our response is supposed to be generosity, right? Because we have a generous God, our response to the gospel is supposed to be generosity. But if we're being honest, and you know that I can't help that, I am, and if you're like me, if you're a sinner like me, that's not always the case. Generosity is rarely going to be our response, as much as it should be, but if we're being honest, it's rarely our response. And what I mean when I say to be generous is generosity, it means we're to be unselfish with what we have and with who we are. All right, let that sink in. We're called to be unselfish with what we have and who we are, right? And it extends a little bit further that we're called, if we're going to be generous, we have to be happy to give what we have and who we are. So we're supposed to be happy to give our time and to give our food and to give money and to give kindness and to give our attention or to give our praise or to give our possessions, our talents, our skills. We're supposed to be happy about giving those things back to God. And that's the hardest part of the sentence that we don't want to hear is that back to God, because that means, first of all, we have to acknowledge it came from God, amen? Like, we have to start there. And then we have to recognize that it goes back to him. So instead of us viewing it as something that we're giving away, it's viewing us as giving something that we borrowed back to where it rightfully belongs. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about generosity. And if you haven't figured it out yet with this series, yes, I'm going to intentionally be highlighting, double-clicking, zooming in, if you will, specifically on being generous with our finances. And you can't leave, we already locked the doors. Yes, we're going to be highlighting finances, but when I say that, that does not mean that we're going to be disregarding all the other ways that we should be generous with our life, like I mentioned, with our time and food, with our presence. I'm not disregarding that. But we are going to be highlighting on generosity and that of finances, because it all ties together, and you're going to see that. Finances become a part of all those different types of generosity. And we're going to be focusing on just this one little way for a little bit, because I just think it's funny, you know, we don't like to talk about giving up our money, and yet, like, money is one of the things that Jesus talked about the most, right? We have to, if Jesus talked about it, then I get to talk about it. I'm just saying. Like, it's one of the things he talked about the most next to love. He talked about it more than prayer and faith combined. It's a little scary, right? Like, out of the 40, there's like 40-ish different parables in the New Testament, and of those 40 different parables, about 11 of them are directly about money, or they use money as a way to teach a spiritual lesson or to teach a spiritual truth. 11 of those 40 revolves around money. And so, I mean, one can only conclude that if he talked about money so much, it has to be important, right? And I conclude that it's because he talked about it so much because he knew it was going to be a vice for us. Not a small one, but a huge one. And so maybe Jesus talked about money because, like the old saying goes, money talks, right? And if that's true, then we should look at the truth that money tells. This is where it gets a little hard. So if we were to look, like, okay, let's look at our bank statements. What truth would be told if we looked at our bank statements? Our banks are so nice now. They create this little picture chart for you. You know what I'm talking about? Online banking, yes. And they create a little pie chart for you just to help you out, to let you know where you spend your money. As if you don't already know, they have to make it in this huge picture. And like, it tells you, like, this is how much this month that you're, according to the places that was charged on your card, that you spent towards like a gas station. Or this is how much that was spent towards what we can guess to be like utility. You know, y'all know what I'm talking about? Like, or like department stores, or like grocery stores. And like, gives you this pie chart, and it just like so happens, like, lets you see, like, oh, I spend a majority on my money on blank. And so if you were to look at your bank statement, it tells the truth about you. Like, if you were to look at mine, you would see the truth, and I don't know why they have to choose the color red. I just feel like that's just makes it even harder. But like, a majority of my circle is food, and I can argue something, because I buy other things at the grocery store too. It's not always just food, so they can move some of that little red back on over. But you would see that as a huge highlighted factor within my bank account. Another one that you would see, I'm surprised my husband hasn't like challenged that I probably spend more. What do I spend more on than? Amazon. Okay, let's not bring up Amazon right now. Okay, Amazon was created by, I really feel like, yes, Amazon is delightful, and we're never going to talk about that. Okay, besides Amazon, okay, books, thank you. That book sounds way better than Amazon. It makes it a little, so I spend a lot of time, a lot of money on books, so much so, it's my escape. So much so that my husband has, like, am I lying? I have a budget on how much I can spend on books a month, and I've gone over that budget every month, right? So that tells you a little bit about me. I need to escape. That doesn't tell you I just like reading. It just tells you that like I have so much going on in my life that sometimes I need to escape from that. So a bank statement tells some truth in my life. Tells me about Amazon in my life. But it's not just telling us where our finances go. It represents us. What we spend our money on, what we prioritize, we're going to put our money into that. And it defines us. What we invest in is going to tell you a little bit about who we are. The same thing goes if we're not talking about finances. You want to move on to time. If if you don't know, you can look on your phone, your iPhone, if you have one, or other phones, and you can look at what you spend your time on your phone. Did you know that? It'll tell you how long you're on social media or how long you're in texting. It'll give you like a little measurement of that. If you didn't know that, now the parents are going to be grabbing all the kids' phones and seeing how long you're. But it does. It tells you spend X amount of time using this app. So it's a measurement to tell you what you spend your time on, how you value your time. So if our bank statement tells the truth about what's really important to us, we kind of get, I get this concept from the story on the Mount. I use this a lot, but when Jesus was giving the story on the Mount, and he's trying to reveal our true priorities, right? At the very end of it there in Matthew 6:21, it says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also," right? That's what he likens it to. And so his point there is what I truly believe. His point is that I truly believe life is eternal. And we won't invest all of our time, and we shouldn't invest all of our time and all of our into possessions and entertainment, which is what we do. We invest our time and our money and our finances into possessions and entertainment, and that's going to perish. And instead what he's saying is that we need to be putting all of our energy and our resources, and yes, that's going to be finances because that's a resource. We should be investing all of that into something that's not going to be perishing. We should be investing it into our behaviors. We should be investing it into our actions. We should be investing it into something that's going to go beyond this life but into the next life. We should be investing it in the lives of others. That's what we should be investing our time and our finances and all of our resources in. So we're going to get into behaviors and actions in a little bit, but I do want to look at another scripture, and we probably preach on this 3 times a year, but I don't care. It's a good one. We're going to be looking at Mark chapter 12, verses 41 through 44. Oh, y'all are so smart. Y'all are so good. I don't know how they do that. The widow's offering. So this is one of the many stories that are involving money. So hear the words. Then he sat down opposite the offering box, and he watched the crowd putting coins into it. And many rich people were throwing in large amounts. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, worth less than a penny. It was equivalent to like 6 minutes of work in a day. So it's less than a penny. He called his disciples and he said to them, "I tell you the truth. This poor widow has put more into the offering box than all the others, for they all gave out of their wealth. But she, out of her poverty, put in what she had to live on, everything that she had." So in this parable, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory, but it wasn't the amount that she gave, but the fact that amount that she did give was a considerate cost to herself. It was extravagantly generous for her. She was in her lane. Now, it said that the other people were giving like way, way, way more money, and that's what we do. We compare what we give to somebody else's, and so we devalue what we've contributed, and so sometimes we don't even give it all. But that's not, there's no comparison. What she gave was surmountably way more than what they had given based off of what it cost her to give it. So it's not what we give, it's why we give. And it's who we give it for. Are we giving for ourselves? Are we giving for praise? Are we giving out of guilt? Out of fear? Because we feel forced? Not the what, it's the why and who for. Because when you give for God, God is what takes it, no matter what it is and no matter how much of it is. When you're giving it with a free heart, it's God who takes it and makes the most out of it. That's what I get out of that story. We can go through so many other scriptures reading about money, because I told you there's a lot of them, and he talks about it. But I think Jesus talks about money because we truly understand. This is how we can truly understand our roles as stewards. In Genesis, it says we're a steward over everything. We understand our role as a steward because money is a tool that we can invest into growing his kingdom and not our kingdom. I'm going to say that again, because money, that's why we talk about it. We have to talk about it because money is a very, very powerful tool. And as you know, with power can help, power can destroy. Money can be a powerful tool where we can invest into either his kingdom or we choose to have money and invest into our kingdom. Money can be a way that we choose to save and to serve people, to help lead them to salvation, if we so choose it. And so I get it. It's hard to be generous with our money when we live in a culture that tells us to build in our kingdom and to not into his kingdom, right? We live in a culture that tells us that you can never have enough, right? And so we ask that question, like, what is the purpose of tithing, right? We ask the question, what does tithing gonna do for me? Instead of really asking the question of, like, what does tithing do for God? And so we get lost in that little ancient term of tithing, and we don't want to talk about it. We don't want to know anything about it. So I liken it to like sports. Speaking of Texans, I liken it to sports. I still do. Me and my husband play volleyball. I converted him from basketball, from the dark side over to volleyball. I love volleyball. I almost went to college for volleyball, but I chose a different career path. And one of the things I loved about volleyball, if you're not familiar, is just like any sport, you have to be in this position to be ready. And I would get so much trouble, not by my coach, by my mom. She would yell in the bleachers. Totally not like, instead of being like, yay, number 8, she's like, move it, number 8, hustle. And I'm like, it's my mom. So one of my things about volleyball is you have to be in this position, when the other team is serving, or any time, you have to be in this position to be ready. Right? And what that position is your feet are apart, you're on your toes, and you're bending down, you have your arms out, and like, before they even serve the ball, you have to be in that position to be ready to receive, right? If you're standing straight up like this, like we would have to take a lap, because even if the ball came straight to us and we did this beautiful pass, our coach was still mad at us because we were lazy, and we call it tree trunks, right? So one of the things that's really annoying, why are you smiling? One of the things that's really annoying with me on our team is, and I call them this, like people get really lazy and they want to use their feet, because you're allowed to use your feet in volleyball. And instead of like taking the effort and being in the stance of being ready, because they're back on their heels, they want to do this to get a ball. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Even if you've watched it, right? And if you know physics, if you were on your feet, meaning on your toes, all it takes is one little step. Do you see that? Ooh, one little step. And here I was to get the ball, right? But in their head, like leaning backwards on this foot, and then not to mention, like, they may not be phenomenal with their foot. Like the ball shanks like into different places, and it's frustrating to me because like, well, I couldn't get there. It was one step. You totally could have got there if you were in a position to be ready, right? And that's how it is the entire game of volleyball. But I liken that to the fact that when it comes to tithing, we have to be in this position to be ready to respond. And a lot of us aren't in that position to be ready to respond. You hear me what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying there? Like a lot of us are standing on our feet and we're not even looking where the ball is, and then we're like, there's no way I could have got that. You could have, if you were in a position to be ready to receive that. And a lot of us, our hearts are not in a position with generosity to be able to give it. Our hearts aren't warm. Just like you have to stretch your muscles for a sport, right? We can't dive in because we have not been stretching our heart muscles. You with me on that? Right? We have not been working on our heart muscles. We have not been stretching our soul strings so that we have the ability to be in a place to be able to have a generous spirit, so that we can see, I see that I need to get ready because I'm about to need to be generous right now. I need to be in a place so when that ball comes flying at my face, I've been paying attention to where I can respond to it. When that person's need comes flying in, I don't have to play like, I thought it was closer to somebody else. The ball was more like over there, but that one gets me. It was closer to that person. And we do that with our generosity. Somebody else has more money, is going to take care of that. I think it's more in that person's lane or on their side of the court. They're in a better position in life to be able to deal with what's coming that way. That's what we do. And and this is what it comes down to. We have to view tithing. And this is where tithing leads into generosity, is that I believe that tithing is a sign that we're trusting God. All right? Tithing meaning like 1/10, taking 1/10 of what we have and just directly giving it to God, trusting that God's going to do with it what God's going to do with it. I believe that tithing is a way that we trust God, and therefore gifts, which is on top of what we give to God, which is leading to generosity, gifts are a sign of generosity. So let me wrap that up again. Tithing is a sign that we trust God. Do with it what you will, God. And then on top of that's an unknown, that's just a staple, that's what we're just called to do. And on top of that, when we want to give a gift is a response. A gift is a sign of it equals generosity. So in order to get to generosity, tithing and trusting God is what leads to be able to have generosity. Tithing is training that equips us to be generous. I'll say that again. Tithing is training that equips us to be generous, or to be able to be generous, to be able to be in a position to be able to respond in a healthy way. And so I know a lot of us need to know, how do we can't overnight like poof and wake up and be Mother Teresa and all of a sudden be this generous spirit, right? We have to work on what a generous spirit is. We have to work on our heart muscles and our soul strings. And I think some of the ways that we can do that is, for example, how do we intertwine generosity into our spirit? I think, first of all, we are called to give first, save second, and spend last. When we give first, it's done. And that becomes who we are as a person. It becomes a part of our pattern that we just want to naturally be a person who gives first. I also think that it means that we are to start small, because it's better than not starting at all. So many times I hear people, we want to wait till we get to a certain place in life because then I can give X amount, because we think that X amount is what really matters. But as you saw with Change for Change, we can't wait to tell you what that number is because we're still collecting all those small pennies. It adds up. We don't get to judge the worth and the value of what we give. Because remember, it's not what we give, it's why we give. I also believe that we are called, and this is the one I want to close in, because this is the one that I think it ties it all together, is that I believe when it comes to tithing and being able to be generous, we need to spend time with people in need. We need to spend time with people in need. Proverbs 11:25 says, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Being around people in need lets us see that need. It exposes us to that need. And one of the hard lessons that our students have to learn is, I mentioned this before, we have a mission trip called UMarmy, where they do some mission work and we go to a different place. And there's so many times this has happened, but I'll never forget this one story where one of the homes they were working on was for a client who was, she was extremely obese to the point to where she was semi-immobile and she couldn't get in and out of her home. The porch was not strong enough for her to physically be able to get in and out of her home. And so it was really difficult. The kids were excited. We want to be able to, this is exciting. But the client was not, let's just say, gracious to the students, and it drove the adults crazy. They're like, this person is just rude. Like, here we are in the hot Texas sun, and we're doing this for them, and like they can't even like say thank you. And they're right. This person kept like changing things around, and they're like, well, that's not good enough. You need to change the boards this way. And well, I thought we were going to do it over there. But what they didn't know was, and this is what, the beautiful lesson we got to teach the students, what they didn't know is that because of this client's obesity, and because they used, they were also agoraphobic, and they were also afraid to leave their home, and they were terrified of social interactions because of how she viewed herself. And so she used the fact that she couldn't get out of her home to kind of keep her in it. And so this was hard for her. She's never had experience. She's never had this many people in her home, near her home. And so she didn't know how to respond. And it's not that she didn't have a gracious heart. She didn't know how to be grateful, right? And there's so much more to the story to that. And we had to teach our students that, and this is my favorite thing to teach because I have to teach myself this, is that we don't do it for a thank you. We do it because God called us to do it. We don't do it so we can post it on Facebook and get a lot of likes about it. You're such a great person. We do it because God called us to do it. We don't do it because people are looking. We're doing it because no one else looked to take care of that need. It's a hard lesson to learn. But we have to surround ourselves with people who are in need, because that gives us the ability to be in that position to be ready to respond whenever we need to be someone who gives generosity. And I have to close out with you guys. I don't know any other way that inspires me of generosity than this congregation itself. I mean, I'm inspired when I see how this congregation responds in their own way with their generosity. For example, we have a teenager who tithes, and she has no money and can barely afford school, and yet she tithes, and we had to buy our groceries in December, but she still tithes. The generosity in that is just amazing. I see the generosity in a single mother in this church whose father barely helps at all, if he does, and it threw her entire life into a different track, and she tithes as a single mother who has to shop at secondhand shops and receive items from other people to be able to support her child. I see the generosity in a family where the husband has been out of a job for a year and a half, And they still tithe. And I quote, because, he said, because God is still providing for me. I see your generosity when there's a member of our congregation who, on top of his tithe, he gives a gift. And the gift goes to the scholarship funds for students to be to attend trips, to attend our mission trips, or to attend our camps. He's been doing that for 3 years. He's sent over 56 students to either Army or Big House or one of our retreats, on top of his tithe. 56 lives have been affected. I see the generosity in a kid here who's 8 years old, and they get $10 for allowance, and they always give $1 in church, and they're adamant about it. And for their 8th birthday, they didn't want gifts for themselves. They wanted their birthday party. They wanted people to bring gifts for other kids who needed it. They had plenty. It's around us. The generosity is here, but when we surround ourselves with people who need it, when we put ourselves in a position to be able to acknowledge that God has placed so many people in our lives that need us, it may not always be a soup kitchen that you have to go to. It may not always be going to a homeless shelter. There are people who need you in your own household. There are people who need us in this very community. There are people who need you in your schools and in your office. Yes, we're called to serve in Mexico, and yes, we're called to serve in Africa, but do not be confused that God has put people right next to you in this room who need you, and they need your generosity. But are you in a position to respond to it? I truly believe that we are called to put our money where our mouth is. I believe we're called to put our heart where our Facebook status is. I believe we're called to put our time where our treasure is, to put our trust to the tithe, and to put generosity in all that we do. Because God gave, so shall we.